Claire Thompson wiped the sweat from her brow, her gloved hands leaving streaks across her tired face. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed overhead, harsh and unrelenting, mirroring the chaos she had endured for the last 12 hours. Tonight had been relentless. From the moment she clocked in, the ER had been a storm of urgency. A multi-car pileup on the highway with victims screaming and bleeding, a heart attack victim in the lobby whose wife refused to leave his side, and a young boy who had collapsed with a seizure so severe that Claire had feared she wouldn't be able to stabilize him. She had worked on her feet, darting between patients, monitoring vitals, administering medications, and offering quiet words of comfort, all while her own exhaustion threatened to pull her under. She paused for a moment, letting her back rest against the nurse's station, watching her colleagues move like well-oiled machines around her. The hospital was a living organism, breathing in panic and exhaling relief, a delicate balance of life and death. Claire had long ago learned to navigate this world with focus and calm, even when her heart threatened to race uncontrollably. But tonight, every alarm, every groan, every frantic plea had weighed on her like an invisible boulder. Her pager finally fell silent, a rare lull signaling the end of her shift. She exchanged a weary smile with Maria, the night shift nurse taking over. "You look like you could use a miracle," Maria said softly, noting the dark circles under Claire's eyes. Claire chuckled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. "A miracle wouldn't hurt," she murmured. Claire grabbed her bag, slinging it over her shoulder. Her feet ached with every step, but the cool night air outside the hospital felt like a bomb. She had barely made it to the sliding doors when she paused, inhaling the crisp, slightly humid air that smelled faintly of rain. The hospital behind her seemed a world away. She should have felt relief, freedom after hours of chaos, but something prickled at the back of her neck. A faint sense of unease she couldn't place. A black SUV slid into the hospital parking lot, its headlights slicing through the misty night. Claire instinctively stepped back, her fatigue momentarily replaced by caution. The vehicle was too pristine, too deliberate in its arrival. 4 men emerged, their movements synchronized and precise, dressed in dark tactical gear that gleamed faintly under the streetlights. They didn't speak, didn't hesitate, they simply approached. Then, to Claire's utter disbelief, they stopped, turned toward her and saluted. "Ma'am," said the tallest man, his voice firm, carrying a weight of authority and respect that sent a chill down her spine. Claire froze, her mind scrambling for comprehension. I'm sorry," she stammered. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from exhaustion anymore, but from shock. The man repeated, even more deliberately, "Ma'am." The word hung in the air like a statement, undeniable and profound. Claire's brow furrowed. She had been a nurse her entire adult life, dedicating herself to the service of others, but never had anyone looked at her this way. The respect, the discipline, it was foreign, intimidating, yet somehow validating. Her gaze shifted to the other 3 men. They stood at rigid attention, eyes forward, silent and alert. Something about their presence radiated a seriousness that felt almost cinematic. Claire glanced down at her own scrubs, suddenly feeling underdressed for whatever was unfolding. One of them handed her a sealed envelope. Without a word, its weight heavier than paper alone. Claire hesitated, fingers brushing over the waxy seal. The fog around the hospital seemed to thicken, muffling distant traffic and casting the world in muted grayscale. For a moment, she wondered if she had finally gone mad from exhaustion. But the deliberate precision of the men, their unwavering gaze, and the word "ma'am" spoken with absolute certainty left no room for doubt. This was real. With a trembling hand, Claire accepted the envelope. Her mind whirled with questions. Who were these men? Why were they here? And why did they address her as "ma'am" with a respect she had never known before? The ordinary rhythm of her life had just been shattered, and she had no idea that stepping outside the hospital doors tonight would mark the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would test her courage, skill, and resolve like nothing in her quiet life as a nurse ever had. As Claire clutched the envelope, a mix of dread and anticipation coiled in her chest. Something told her that by the time the night ended, nothing would ever feel normal again. Claire stood frozen in the hospital parking lot, the cold night air prickling her skin, her hands still clutching the mysterious envelope. The black SUV idled silently behind her, the engines hummed strangely calm against the chaos of her racing thoughts. Her exhaustion from the ER seemed to vanish, replaced by a strange, tense alertness. The 4 men in tactical gear didn't move casually, they remained statuesque, like shadows carved from steel, each one radiating discipline and authority. They watched her, but it wasn't a threatening gaze. It was measured, precise, almost reverent. Claire had dealt with demanding patients, grieving families, and panicked paramedics, but she had never felt a tension like this. Her heart thumped loudly, echoing in her ears. "Ma'am," the tallest one repeated, his voice carrying the same commanding tone. Something about the way he said it made Claire's stomach tighten. She glanced at her own scrubs, suddenly aware of how ordinary she looked in the face of these extraordinary men. She felt underdressed, unprepared, and wholly out of her depth. Who are you?" she asked, her voice wavering. The words felt weak against the weight of their presence. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he extended a hand, holding the sealed envelope she had been given. "This is for you. Open it." Claire hesitated. There was a part of her that wanted to run, to close the door of her life behind her and retreat to the comfort of normality. But another part, a deep, instinctive part, pushed her to obey. She tore open the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, a photograph fell into her palm. She gasped. The photograph showed a man in a Navy SEAL uniform, his posture rigid, eyes steady, and expression determined. Claire's breath caught in her throat. It was him, her father. Her mind reeled. He had died years ago, years before she could truly know him, leaving behind memories wrapped in pride and unspoken lessons. Beneath the photo was a handwritten note, each word deliberate and urgent. "Claire, your courage is needed. Lives depend on your skill. Trust them. Trust yourself. The time is now." Claire's eyes filled with tears she hadn't realized were waiting to fall. She read the note again, heart hammering. Her father's legacy, his discipline, his bravery, was calling to her in a way she had never imagined. But why her? She was a nurse, trained in hospitals, not battlefields. Her life had been one of saving lives quietly, without medals or recognition. And yet here were men who saw her, really saw her. The tallest SEAL, apparently the leader, stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering focus. "We know this is unexpected, but the situation is critical. Civilians are in danger, and your medical expertise is essential. You have no time to question yourself. Lives are at stake." Claire's mind raced. Fear, doubt, and adrenaline collided in her chest. She wanted to say no. She wanted to retreat to the familiar hum of her apartment, to the quiet comfort of routine. But she couldn't ignore the way her instincts stirred like they always did when she faced crisis. She had faced chaos in the ER before, saved patients who were seconds from death, calmed terrified families, made impossible decisions in impossible moments. She could do this. She had to try. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. Okay, tell me what I need to do," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The SEAL nodded, a small but approving motion. "Follow us. We'll explain everything on the way." As she climbed into the SUV, the world outside seemed to fade, replaced by a strange, electric tension. The city lights blurred past the windows as the vehicle moved through quiet streets. Claire couldn't stop staring at the photograph of her father, pressed to her chest. It was as if his presence, long absent, had returned to guide her. The SUV turned onto a highway leading out of the city, the night stretching endlessly ahead. Claire glanced at the men around her, silent, alert, unwavering. They weren't soldiers in a parade. They were professionals on a mission, and she was now part of it. A surge of fear hit her, followed by something unexpected, a spark of determination that she thought of the patients she had left behind at the hospital, the lives she had tried to save tonight, and all the times she had been the calm in the storm. This was just another storm, bigger and darker. But she was still the same Claire Thompson. Somewhere deep inside, she knew one thing for certain. Tonight, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The SUV hummed along the dark highway, the city's glow fading behind them as Claire sat stiffly, gripping the envelope with one hand while the other rested tensely on her knee. Her mind was a storm of questions. Who were these men really? Why her? And what kind of danger were they leading her into? Every instinct screamed caution. Yet a deeper voice, the same one that had guided her through countless ER crises, urged her to stay calm and focused. Finally, the leader spoke. His voice was steady, precise, leaving no room for argument. "Claire, what we are about to do is urgent. A village overseas has been caught in crossfire. Civilians are trapped, injured, and in need of immediate medical assistance. Your expertise is crucial. We cannot do this without you." Claire's pulse quickened. "Overseas," she whispered, barely able to believe what she was hearing. She had imagined maybe an emergency medical task force, perhaps a local disaster, but overseas, in a conflict zone. Her training had been in hospitals, not war zones. Yet, she noticed something in the men's eyes, a quiet confidence that suggested they weren't exaggerating. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a mistake. They truly needed her. The SUV slowed as it approached a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the space was a controlled chaos of tactical gear, maps, and equipment, men and women moving with the fluid precision of a well-rehearsed unit. Claire realized she had stepped into a world she had only ever seen on television, a world of operations, missions, and risks most civilians never imagined. One of the SEALs handed her a folder. "Everything you need to know is in here," he said, his tone neutral, almost clinical. Claire opened it with shaking hands. Inside were satellite images of a small village nestled in a valley, coordinates, casualty reports, and notes on the current situation. Civilians were trapped in homes that had been shelled, and several injured local residents were in need of immediate treatment. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. She had treated trauma victims before, yes, but never in an environment like this. Chaos and violence layered over human suffering. Every second a potential death sentence. Her mind flickered to her first day in the ER when a patient had slipped into cardiac arrest before she could even assess the room. She had been terrified, but she had acted, and she had saved him. "This isn't like your hospital," the leader said, reading the question in her eyes. "You won't have your machines, your team, or certainty. You'll need to improvise, to trust your instincts. That's why we called you. You can handle pressure, you can make decisions in chaos, and that is exactly what's required here." Claire swallowed hard. Every fiber of her body screamed danger. Yet another part of her, the part that had thrived in high-stress moments for years, rose to the occasion. She could do this. She had to. The people who would depend on her didn't have a choice. Neither did she. The leader stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We know this is overwhelming, but you are not alone. We will protect you. Follow instructions, stay aware, and trust yourself. Lives are counting on it." "Claire," she nodded slowly, folding the folder carefully and clutching it to her chest. The responsibility pressed on her like a physical weight, yet beneath it, a spark of resolve ignited. This was a test of everything she had learned every year, every late night, every crisis in the ER that had taught her to stay calm while the world was collapsing around her. Her gaze flicked to the other SEALs around her, alert, disciplined, unflinching. They were professionals, yes, but they also looked at her differently than any patient ever had, differently than any colleague had. There was trust there, respect, and maybe even recognition that her quiet courage in the ER had prepared her for this moment. Claire felt a shiver of fear, but also a surge of determination. She had never considered herself a hero, only a nurse doing her job. Yet tonight, in this strange and dangerous world, she realized heroism could take many forms, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe she had always been ready for this, ready to step beyond the boundaries of her ordinary life, and into something extraordinary. The SUV started moving again, heading towards the airfield where helicopters waited. Claire stared out the window at the night sky, heavy clouds illuminated by the occasional streak of lightning in the distance. The mission lay ahead, dangerous and unknown, but one thing was certain: she could not turn back now. And deep in her chest, a quiet, resolute thought took hold. She would do whatever it took to save lives, just as she had always done. Claire's hands shook slightly as she stepped out of the SUV onto the tarmac. The night air bit at her skin, and the rhythmic thrum of helicopter blades overhead vibrated through her chest. She tried to steady herself, drawing in a deep breath, but adrenaline coursed through her veins like wildfire. This was no hallway, no bustling city hospital. This was something else entirely, a world of precision, danger, and unpredictability. Around her, the SEALs moved with effortless coordination, checking equipment, reviewing plans, and communicating in clipped tones. Their eyes occasionally flicked toward her, not with judgment, but with an unspoken expectation. They knew she was untested in this environment, yet they trusted her, and that trust, more than the helicopters, the maps, or the mission, weighed on her shoulders. One of the SEALs handed her a vest. It was heavy, packed with supplies and protective padding, unlike anything she had ever worn in a hospital. "It's your armor," he said simply. Claire felt the weight of it press against her body, both physically and metaphorically. Armor wasn't just metal and fabric, it was responsibility. Every strap fastened was a reminder that lives would depend on her decisions tonight. As she secured the helmet, Claire's mind raced. She thought of her patients, the bleeding, the panicked families, the moments when seconds had stretched into eternities. She had faced death before, in controlled chaos under fluorescent lights, but here, in this foreign night, surrounded by men trained for combat, she realized that the stakes were different. Every decision carried far-reaching consequences. One wrong move could cost lives. The leader approached, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. "Fear is natural," he said quietly, almost gently. It means you care. Use it. Let it sharpen you, not paralyze you. Claire nodded, trying to anchor herself to his words. Her hands were still trembling, but she could feel the resolve in her chest slowly hardening. Fear, she realized, could be a tool, just like it had been in the ER. She remembered her first day on the job, when a patient had collapsed mid-surgery, and all the monitors were blaring alarms. She had felt panic clawing at her, yet instinct had kicked in. She had acted, stayed calm, saved a life. That same instinct was alive now, pulsing through her veins, telling her she could face whatever came next. The SEALs gathered around a map projected on a portable screen. Claire leaned over, scanning the coordinates and routes. They explained, in careful but urgent detail. The mission, a small village in conflict, had been bombed, civilians trapped, and several Allied forces injured. Claire's role would be critical. She would be the medical lifeline, tending to wounded civilians and team members, improvising treatment in circumstances far beyond the sterile walls of her hospital. Her stomach churned at the thought, but she didn't flinch. She had spent her life preparing for moments like this, even if she hadn't known it. Every sleepless night, every tear shed over patients she couldn't save, every hand she had held while someone drew their last breath, it all led to this. One of the SEALs, a young woman with sharp eyes, handed Claire a compact medical kit. "You'll need this more than anything else," she said. "Everything else is just tools. This is your power." Claire held it tightly, feeling a strange sense of reassurance. She had power here, not through guns, not through training, but through skill, precision, and calm in chaos. Finally, the helicopters roared to life. Claire's pulse accelerated. Fear gnawed at her, but determination overtook it. She climbed aboard, feeling the rush of wind, the vibration of engines, the reality of what lay ahead. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was part of something larger, a mission that required her courage, her knowledge, and her humanity. As the helicopter lifted off into the night sky, Claire stared down at the world below, fog and lights blurring together. Somewhere in the distance, the village awaited, trapped and in need of help. And she, Claire Thompson, was on her way to face it, heart pounding, hands steady, ready to meet fear head on. Tonight, she realized, fear was not her enemy. It was a signal that she was alive, that she mattered, and that she could rise to meet the impossible. The helicopter sliced through the night sky, its blades beating a relentless rhythm that matched Claire's own racing heartbeat. Below them, the landscape was a patchwork of shadows and dim lights, the dark outline of a village nestled in a valley, barely visible under the faint glow of sporadic fires. Claire gripped a seat in front of her, knuckles white, the medical kit resting on her lap like a lifeline. The SEALs moved with a quiet intensity, checking weapons, communicating with hand signals, and scanning the terrain with unwavering focus. Claire couldn't help but feel out of place at first, the hum of the helicopter and the faint scent of fuel making her stomach twist. But as she observed them, a strange confidence began to grow. These were people who thrived in chaos, who faced danger daily without hesitation, and somehow, she belonged among them. Her skill as a nurse, her ability to stay calm in crises, was their missing piece. The leader leaned close, his voice steady against the wind. "Remember, Claire, your role is critical. You'll handle injuries in the field. Stay alert, move quickly, trust yourself." Claire nodded, trying to focus on the words over the roar of the helicopter. Her training flashed through her mind: trauma care, triage, stabilization. She had done this countless times in ER emergencies, but never under fire. Never in an environment where every moment carried life or death consequences beyond her control. The helicopter began its descent, the valley opening below them like a scene from a nightmare. Smoke curled from damaged buildings, and the faint cries of frightened civilians reached their ears. Claire's stomach knotted. This wasn't a simulation. This was real, and it was terrifying. As the helicopter touched down in a small clearing, Claire jumped out first, letting the adrenaline surge through her veins. The SEALs fanned out immediately, securing the perimeter with precision. Claire's eyes darted across the scene, collapsed structures, wounded civilians lying in the dirt, and the wounded, panicked villagers moving erratically. Her pulse quickened, but she took a deep breath and stepped forward, kit in hand. The first victim she reached was an older man with a deep gash along his arm, blood soaking through his makeshift bandage. Claire knelt beside him, speaking softly. "I'm going to help you. You're going to be okay." Her hands moved automatically, cleaning the wound, applying a fresh dressing, and securing it with strips of fabric from her kit. The man's breathing eased slightly under her calm touch, and she felt a surge of determination. Nearby, a young boy screamed, trapped under a fallen beam. Claire ran to him, assessing the injury, a broken leg, minor bleeding, shock. "We're going to get you out of here," she said, steadying him as the SEALs lifted the debris. She worked quickly, checking vital signs and stabilizing him for transport. Time stretched and twisted. Every second brought new chaos. A wounded SEAL limped toward her, shrapnel embedded in his leg. A mother clutched her infant, terrified. Smoke billowed from a nearby building, threatening to engulf the area. Claire moved from one patient to another, triaging, bandaging, calming, stabilizing. Her hands were steady, her mind clear, even as the chaos swirled around her. Through it all, the SEALs watched her, respect evident in their eyes. "Ma'am, she's incredible," one muttered to another. Claire heard it, her chest tightening not from ego, but from the realization that her work mattered here in a way she hadn't fully understood. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. By the time the last of the civilians were evacuated, Claire's arms ached, her clothes were smeared with dirt and blood, and her lungs burned from adrenaline. But a quiet satisfaction settled over her. She had survived the first wave. She had saved lives. She had stepped into the unknown and come through intact. As the SEALs regrouped, the leader approached her, his gaze intense but approving. "You did well, Claire. Very well. This is only the beginning, but your skill and courage just changed lives tonight." Claire nodded, her body trembling from exhaustion but her spirit electrified. She realized that while the night had tested her like never before, it had also revealed a strength she had never truly acknowledged. Fear was still present, yes, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. As they prepared to move deeper into the village, Claire gripped her kit, steeling herself for the next challenge. The mission was far from over, but she had discovered something vital. She could face the impossible, and she could save lives where others might falter. Tonight, Claire Thompson wasn't just a nurse. She was a lifeline. The village was a chaotic storm of dust, smoke, and cries. Claire Thompson's heart pounded as she moved through the debris, medical kit in hand. Each step felt weighted with responsibility. Every sound amplified, a child screaming in terror, the groan of an injured man, the distant crack of gunfire. This was no longer a mission on paper. This was life, raw and fragile, screaming for someone to act. Her first patient was a young boy trapped under a collapsed beam. His leg was pinned, and panic flooded his wide eyes. "It's going to be okay," Claire whispered, kneeling beside him. "I'm not going anywhere." She assessed his injury quickly. Fractured femur, minor bleeding, shock. Improvising, she stabilized his leg with strips of fabric and a rigid piece of metal salvaged from the debris. She spoke to him softly, recounting everything from her experience, how calming words could anchor fear, even amid chaos. The boy's sobs softened slightly, and for a moment, she felt the fragile connection between hope and skill. No sooner had she finished than a wounded SEAL staggered toward her, blood dripping from a deep shrapnel wound in his thigh. Claire's mind raced. She had trained for trauma, but never in these conditions, under fire, with debris collapsing around them, and civilians screaming for help. "Claire," shouted the SEAL leader from a distance. "We need that area secured now." Claire took a steadying breath. Fear clawed at her chest, but she knew panic would kill more than bullets ever could. She knelt beside the soldier, assessed the wound, and began emergency field care, controlling the bleeding with pressure, wrapping bandages tightly, and instructing him to remain still. "You're going to be okay," she said, her voice firm and soothing. "We're getting you out of here." As she worked, explosions echoed nearby, sending clouds of dust into the air. Smoke burned her eyes and ash settled on her hair and clothes, but she continued. Around her, the SEALs moved like shadows, securing the area, their discipline and focus a stark contrast to the chaos. Yet she realized something important. She wasn't just an observer. She was part of this team now. Her hands, her knowledge, her calm under pressure were as essential as their weapons. A mother appeared suddenly, clutching her infant tightly. Her eyes were wild with fear. Claire gently took the baby into her arms, quickly checking for injuries, none severe, just frightened and crying. "It's okay," she murmured, rocking the child slightly. "We'll get you somewhere safe." The mother's hands trembled as she let Claire guide them toward the temporary triage area. Minutes stretched endlessly. Every second brought new crises, a father screaming for his daughter trapped in rubble, a wounded villager with deep abdominal wounds, a frightened elderly man unable to move. Claire triaged, treated, calmed, and stabilized with unrelenting focus, adrenaline sharpening her senses beyond what fatigue should allow. She moved instinctively, each decision precise, each action calculated. Finally, the CL leader approached her again. "Ma'am, your work is saving lives out here. You're incredible." His voice carried respect she had never known outside her father's stories. Claire's chest tightened not with pride, but with a profound awareness of the lives she had touched. For the first time, she realized that heroism wasn't always about medals or combat. Sometimes it was about presence, skill, and calm in the face of chaos. Hours passed. The village's immediate crisis stabilized. Civilians were evacuated, injuries treated, and the worst of the chaos contained. Claire's clothes were torn, smeared with dirt and blood, her hair plastered to her forehead. She was exhausted to the bone, yet there was a quiet triumph in her eyes, a recognition that she had faced fear, uncertainty, and raw life-and-death situations, and emerged not only capable but essential. The SEALs regrouped for the next phase of the operation. The leader placed a hand on her shoulder. "Tonight, you were the difference between life and death for these people. You were steady when it mattered most. Don't forget it." Claire nodded silently, swallowing back tears she didn't realize had formed. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her own courage, the strength she had always taken for granted, now illuminated in the harshest light of reality. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a lifeline, a calm center in a storm that could have swallowed countless lives. The night wasn't over. More danger awaited, more lives depended on them, and more challenges loomed. But Claire Thompson had discovered something vital. Even in the most terrifying moments, she could rise. She could face the impossible, and she could save lives where others might falter. Tonight, she understood what it truly meant to be called ma'am. The village was quiet now, a fragile calm settling over the chaos that had consumed it hours earlier. Fires smoldered in the distance, and the faint cries of the injured had been replaced by the steady murmurs of relief. Claire Thompson stood amid the remnants of devastation, her clothes streaked with soot, dust, and dried blood. Every muscle ached, every limb screamed in protest, but a profound sense of accomplishment anchored her to the ground. She had saved lives, dozens of them. Civilians, children, injured soldiers, all of them had survived because she had stayed calm, decisive, and focused when the world around her seemed determined to fall apart. For the first time in years, Claire allowed herself to feel something beyond not arrogance, not the desire for recognition, but the quiet, undeniable pride of someone who had faced fear and emerged alive on the other side. The SEALs were regrouping nearby, checking their wounded, securing evacuation routes, and ensuring no one had been left behind. The leader approached Claire, his expression unreadable for a moment before breaking into a rare, genuine smile. "Claire," he said, placing a firm hand on her shoulder, "you've done more than any of us could have hoped for. Your skill, your courage, it saved lives tonight. You were steady when it mattered most. Don't ever underestimate that." Claire's throat tightened. She swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing on her. In her world as a nurse, life or death decisions had always been daily occurrences, but they were usually private, unseen, unheralded. Here, in this chaotic and dangerous environment, she had been acknowledged not just for her skill, but for her courage, her presence, her humanity. Nearby, one of the SEALs whispered to another, audible enough for Claire to hear, "Ma'am, she's incredible." Claire felt a lump in her throat. The word ma'am, repeated by these men who had risked their lives in combat, carried a resonance far beyond formality. It was respect, admiration, and recognition all rolled into one. The young boy she had rescued hours earlier clung to his mother, safe and crying from relief. Claire knelt beside them for a brief moment, checking once more to ensure he was unharmed. The mother whispered a heartfelt thanks, tears streaming down her face. Claire nodded, brushing the dust from her hands. "You're safe now," she said quietly. "That's all that matters." The SEAL leader approached again, this time holding a small digital device displaying satellite images of the area. "We've secured the village. Evacuation teams are on their way. Thanks to you, everyone we could reach survived. Your work was exceptional." Exhaustion washed over Claire, but it was tempered by a sense of awe. She had operated in a world she had never imagined herself, part of a battlefield far from the sterile, controlled chaos of the O&D. She had risen to the occasion. Every decision she had made, every action she had taken, had mattered. Every life she had touched was proof. As the evacuation helicopters began lifting off, the team gathered to debrief, and Claire felt the SEAL's eyes on her, watching with a mixture of admiration and respect. The leader spoke again, voice steady and commanding. "Tonight, we witnessed courage of the highest order, not from trained combatants alone, but from someone who brought their skill, heart, and humanity into a place where both were desperately needed. Claire Thompson, you've earned not only our gratitude but our respect." The words settled over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. For years, she had thought heroism was quiet, unnoticed, perhaps even insignificant. Tonight she had seen its reflection in the eyes of those she had saved, and in the acknowledgement of these extraordinary men. She realized that heroism was not defined by medals or glory, it was defined by courage under pressure, compassion in chaos, and the willingness to act when others might freeze. Claire stood, shoulders squared, despite the ache in her limbs, and looked around at the village she had helped save. Smoke still drifted lazily into the sky, fires still smoldered in the distance, but the cries of panic had been replaced by whispers of relief. She had done it. She had faced fear, navigated chaos, and saved lives that would not have survived without her. As the SEALs prepared to leave, one of them saluted. "Ma'am," he said, and this time Claire understood its full weight. It wasn't just respect, it was acknowledgement of her courage, skill, and heart. For the first time, Claire Thompson allowed herself to truly feel proud of who she was and what she could accomplish. Tonight, she was more than a nurse. She was a hero. Claire Thompson walked through the sliding doors of the hospital, the familiar fluorescent lights washing over her like a soft, sterile embrace. The hum of the ER felt almost comforting after the chaos of the last 48 hours. She could hear the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the shuffling of nurses, and the low murmur of patient families. Life here had continued as usual, completely oblivious to the extraordinary events she had just survived. Her body ached from exhaustion, the fatigue in her bones reminded her of every long shift she had ever endured, but her spirit felt lighter, somehow stronger. She had faced chaos and terror in a foreign village, saved lives under impossible conditions, and seen the raw vulnerability of humanity up close. She had been called ma'am by men who lived and breathed danger, and in that word she had felt the deepest acknowledgement of her courage. Her co-workers looked up as she passed, curious smiles and friendly greetings greeting her. "Rough night?" Maria asked, noticing the faint dust on her scrubs and the weariness etched into her face. Claire smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You wouldn't believe it if I told you," she murmured, letting herself quietly enjoy the normalcy, the calm, after the storm. Later that afternoon, a formal notice arrived from the Navy. Claire sat at her desk, hands trembling slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter of commendation, recognizing her extraordinary contribution during the mission. It praised her calm decisiveness, her expertise under extreme pressure, and her courage in saving lives. For the first time in her career, Claire saw her work outside the private, quiet world of the ER validated in a way that carried real weight. She held the letter for a long moment, reading and rereading the words. Pride washed over her, but it was a quiet, reflective pride. This recognition wasn't about fame or attention, it was about understanding her own value, her own ability to rise to any challenge. She had always thought heroism required medals or grand gestures, but tonight she understood differently. Heroism could be calm, unassuming, and still light. Walking through the hospital corridors later, Claire felt a subtle change in herself. She moved with quiet authority now, her presence steady, unshakable. Patients and colleagues alike seemed to sense it. She smiled more freely, spoke more confidently, and carried herself with a subtle strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She had faced terror, uncertainty, and life or death chaos, and she had emerged not only alive but transformed. That evening she returned home and sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She thought of the villagers, of the boys she had saved, of the wounded SEALs, and of the lives that had depended on her in those critical moments. She thought of her father and the note that had started it all, and she finally understood what he had meant about courage. It was about showing up when it mattered most, even when fear threatened to hold you back. Claire realized that her life would never be the same. The ER would still be demanding, exhausting, and sometimes heartbreaking, but she had been reminded of her own strength, her capacity for courage, and the extraordinary impact one person could have when they trusted themselves. Her quiet acts of heroism had been recognized, yes, but more importantly, she now recognized herself. The word ma'am echoed in her mind not as a formality, but as a symbol of respect, recognition, and acknowledgement of her courage. She had never sought it, but she understood it now. She allowed herself a soft smile, finally feeling at peace with the duality of her life, the ordinary nurse in the ER and the extraordinary presence in a battlefield that had demanded everything she had to give. As night fell, Claire Thompson sat quietly, her medical kit tucked away, the echoes of helicopters fading in memory. She knew that life would continue, challenges would arise, and fear would always be part of the journey. But she also knew this. She was ready for it. She had faced the unimaginable, stood firm under pressure, and made a difference when it mattered most. And in the quiet of her apartment, Claire allowed herself to feel proud, not for recognition, not for glory, but for having the courage to answer the call when it came, and to know, finally, that she was a hero in her own right.